Welcome, listener. You are now entering another slow and uneventful journey through the quiet corridors of history. This time, we find ourselves among dusty scrolls and ink-stained ledgers. The air smells faintly of sheep and parchment. Tonight's topic is medieval taxation, a subject so dull, so repetitive, and so wrapped in regulation that it might gently lull even the most stubborn mind to sleep. So close your eyes, breathe evenly, and prepare for a journey through the tedious but necessary world of feudal finance. What was a tax in the Middle Ages? A tax in the medieval period was not simply a sum of money owed to a distant government. It was a lived reality, often measured not in coins, but in grain, livestock, or days of unpaid labor. While modern taxes might be abstract numbers on a screen, medieval taxation was often physical and deeply personal. To be taxed in the Middle Ages was to part with a portion of the only cow you owned, or to surrender part of the barley you harvested by hand. The word tax might not even have existed in the local language. Instead, people referred to dues, obligations, services, and rents. The king had his tax, the church had its tithe. The local lord demanded rent, and sometimes a passing noble or bishop would impose additional levies. These burdens were accepted not always with resentment, but often as the unquestioned order of things. The act of taxation might involve no coinage at all. A peasant might deliver a basket of eggs, a woven blanket, or a load of chopped firewood. Such exchanges were recorded in thick books, bound in leather, written in Latin, and stored in locked chests. To not pay was to risk punishment. Not always violent punishment, but exclusion from communal fields, or denial of rights to use the mill or the oven. Some taxes were seasonal, like the tallage. Others were occasional, like the aid requested for a royal wedding. There were fixed dues and arbitrary ones. A peasant might work 2 days a week on the lord's land as part of their obligation. These were recorded not in calendars, but in the fading memory of local custom. Asterisk, who paid and who collected. Everyone paid, or at least everyone below the level of nobility. In towns, merchants paid based on stalls, scales, or ships. In villages, peasants paid in grain, livestock, or labor. The king's tax collectors were often local officials or sheriffs who had the difficult job of gathering these dues. They traveled with scrolls, seals, and sometimes armed guards. Collectors had to be careful not to take too much, as too high. A demand could spark unrest, but taking too little meant the treasury remained empty and the king's projects stalled. Tax collectors were despised, but necessary. Sometimes, collectors took extra for themselves, causing complaints and petitions. To the king, occasionally, a collector was replaced or punished for greed. Some villages had assemblies to decide how to meet the tax quota, dividing the burden fairly or unfairly among households. Other times, the lord simply decreed the amount. The system was far from perfect, but held together by centuries of custom, and a shared understanding that taxes were the price of peace, protection, and the strange rituals of medieval life. How taxes were paid and recorded. Paying taxes was a slow and detailed process. Peasants gathered their dues at market days or before harvest. They carried baskets of grain, pots of honey, chickens, or freshly shorn wool. Each item was measured, counted, and sometimes tasted to check quality. At a local manor, scribes recorded the payments on parchment with quills. These ledgers were not simple lists but carefully written documents, sometimes decorated with symbols or small drawings. The accounts were verified by multiple officials before being sealed and sent to the regional tax office. In towns, payments were often made in coins, hammered and weighed to ensure value. Every transaction was documented twice or thrice to avoid errors and fraud. This meticulous record-keeping created a paper trail that allowed kings to track the wealth of their realm. But the process could take weeks or months, with couriers carrying messages between villages, manors, and castles. If a village failed to meet its quota, penalties ranged from fines to forced labor. Some peasants fled or hid goods, increasing suspicion and inspections. The cycle of payment and recording was the pulse of medieval administration, slow and relentless. What taxes were used for once taxes arrived at the royal treasury? They began a new journey. Kings used these funds for many purposes. Building and maintaining castles was a priority, as these stone fortresses symbolized authority and defense. Castles required stones carved by masons, timber beams, ironwork for gates, and the labor of hundreds. Another large expense was the church. Tithes funded cathedrals, monasteries, and the clergy's daily life. Cathedrals took generations to build, often centuries, paid for by countless tithes. Warfare consumed much of the treasury, especially during prolonged conflicts like the 100 Years' War. Kings needed to equip knights with armor, swords, and horses, pay archers, build siege engines, and maintain garrisons. Battles could drain the treasury rapidly, requiring more taxes. Some tax money supported grand feasts, court entertainments, and royal luxury. The king's household included cooks, musicians, and servants, all paid from the royal purse. Clerks and scribes who managed the kingdom's vast paperwork also required salaries, parchment, and ink. Sometimes kings redistributed funds for public works like bridges, roads, or hospitals, but these were less common. Taxes were the blood flowing through the kingdom's body, sustaining its many parts and ensuring the survival of medieval society. Final thoughts as the day ends and the last coins are counted. Remember that medieval taxes were not just numbers, but the foundation of a complex and delicate society. Every sack of grain, every paid coin, every day of labor kept the wheels turning. The peasants, the merchants, the knights, the priests, and the king were all bound by this web of obligation. The next time you feel burdened by modern taxes, think of the slow, dusty, and often frustrating world of medieval finance. The long hours spent measuring barley or counting sheep may not seem glamorous, but they were essential to the peace and order that allowed kingdoms to grow. Now close your eyes and let the quiet weight of history settle gently on your mind. Sleep well.